Guys, it's Mike here from Taylor RC. I wanted to give you a short and hopefully informative guide on starting tips for your Taylor big bore engines. So I often get questions about how to start it, especially from people that are new to the WJ146 Carb. Obviously we have some smaller engines. The 40 is available with the Rooster Tail 990, which is a very simple carb to use, and guys coming from smaller engines will be familiar with it. So this is focused on the WJ carb in this video. So this engine's totally stone cold, hasn't been started in a couple of weeks, so it's a good example, a totally fair example. I'm not saying I'm the best in the world with carburetors, but I've got my ways of working, and they work well for me, and I've helped lots of people getting themselves up and running. So I think I'm in a good position to help you out. So totally cold engine. The first thing you're going to do is put this, can you see this lever here? This is the choke lever. So, and you hear that click on. As that clicks on the WJ146, there is a black lever here that you can just see that clicks across and holds the throttle open during the choke procedure, just to get a bit more air in there, as well as the extra fuel that's going in to help with the situation. So what we've done now, we've put the engine on the carburetor, sorry, onto choke setting, and what we're hoping to achieve is a pop. We're not expecting it to start now. We're just hoping to get that pop to show that there's fuel in the engine, the spark is working properly, and then we can turn the choke off to actually attempt to start the engine. So the fuel has probably drained back a little bit from this car because it's been stood a couple of weeks. We'll see how good the seal is on the fuel lines. I would expect a couple of pulls, somewhere between 1 if you're incredibly lucky and there's 0 leak backs, to 5 or 6 if things have settled a little bit and it's been a long time since you started. So let's see how we go. Well, okay, that was slightly better than I was expecting. There was obviously some fuel sat in the carburetor or in the reed valve area from the last time it was run that just give it enough fuel to sort of start a second and die. So there was our intermediate session. Now the engine is fully primed. The reason that it started and stopped quickly, or more commonly you'll get just a pop and then stop, just a momentary pop and then it'll die again, is that now the engine has too much fuel in there, but which is not a bad thing for getting it primed up when it's cold. So my advice to you, and what works very well for me, is turn the choke off there. Now I like to put that lever there, because if you leave that black lever on, the idea of it from Walbro is that then it'll start up with plenty of revs and really get started. But the problem is there, as you know, with an RC car, the next thing you've got it is flying off out the way where you don't want it. So I would take that lever off, but don't just leave it static. My advice to you, my tip, is just to open it up with your hand just a little bit. You see how much I'm moving it there? Just a little crack. And then with your hand there, holding the throttle open, relatively simple. You could do it with the throttle if you wanted to, but I mean, it's not difficult with your hand. Is then just So, as I said, just that little crack of throttle, that can be the difference between an easy, convenient start and pulling and pulling for ages because it's not quite wanted to go. Just that little bit of extra air that you're allowing in there to mix with the fuel that you've already pulled in on your choke pull. I mean, that was about as good as it gets. I kind of wish it would have been more difficult than that. So what I'm going to do now is purposely flood the engine. So I'm going to put the choke back on. Obviously the engine does not want any more choke now. It's ready to be used. It's ready just to be warmed up, ticked over for a few minutes, because it's important not to just go flat out with a cold engine. Get it warmed up to temperature and use it. But I'm going to put the choke back on, which obviously the engine does not want, and I'm going to purposely flood it just to show you. You see, it's stopped again because it's too much fuel. So I'm now pulling way too much fuel into the engine. This is what happens if someone accidentally leaves the choke on and hasn't fully disengaged this silver lever at the right hand side. They could be pulling, thinking, why is my engine not starting? Why is my engine not starting? And all they're doing is making it worse and worse because they're flooding the engine. So we've now flooded the engine. I can smell fuel because I've pulled. I'll do it once more. So there's lots and lots of fuel in the engine now because the choke's been left on way too long. The engine doesn't want that much choke. I'm going to turn it off. I'm going to disengage the lever again because I prefer to do it with my hand so I have full control. I'm going to give it plenty of throttle. I'm going to open it up to full throttle for a second, but I'm ready to snap it back when I want to, yeah? So I've opened it up to full throttle to get lots and lots of air in there to mix with the flooded, over-fueled engine that I have at the minute. Let's see if we can get rid of the flooding situation. It's a little bit lumpy. It's a bit lumpy because obviously it's got fuel in there. Yes, you see it started up really rich and smoky because it was a bit flooded. It wasn't badly flooded, but it was just a bit of an example for you of what to do if you do flood your engine. I mean, if you get to the stage where you flooded it really bad, you will have fuel, so much fuel in there that you can't even start it even with full throttle open. You're probably going to have to get to a situation where either you remove your intake manifold and reed valve and actually pour the fuel out of the engine. I mean, don't get me wrong, to do that you have got something seriously wrong. Either you're pulling it for ages and not having any success and just flooding it terrible, or something else is going on to cause it to flood that badly. You really shouldn't end up in that position. One thing that I would always say, and I try to say to people as much as I can, if you're pulling the engine more than 10 times in a row and it's not starting, don't just keep pulling it. Something is clearly not right. Make a change. You're not going to suddenly have a miracle because you just keep pulling it forever. If the engine doesn't want to start, it's just not going to start unless you do something else to help it start. So obviously cold engine always wants fuel, so you're going to use that choke start to get some fuel in there, and then you're going to mix the air with the correct amount of air with it to get it to start depending on the temperature of the engine. We got a cold engine, so we wanted to choke it up and then to get it fired up. That was a good example of it being flooded. The full throttle when I did that was just to try and fire lots and lots of air in there to mix with the excess fuel. And the reason, obviously, it was smoking badly for a second because it was flooded, but it very quickly cleared itself and was able to idle on its own. So I mean, if for safety, sometimes it's worth just unhooking the throttle linkage from the carb so that you can more easily operate it with your hand. But I think the biggest tip that I would say to anyone is to do that. Once your choke was on, you've got your pop or your little start and then die, whatever. I mean, this engine likes to it's been run quite a bit. The carb's well used, so it for whatever reason it likes to just start and then die again. That's no different to your pop situation. It's just trying to prime the engine. Is when you turn that off, is to disengage the black lever, and then with your fingers, just that little crack. Can you see that clearly? Just a little bit. And by doing it with your hand, you've got direct control over the engine. You're not relying on anything else. If you need to add a bit more, you can add a bit more if it's a bit flooded, or if you need to just back it off because the car's going to start moving, you can do that very quickly. That's why I always would say is use your knees on the wheels, use your hand here, and you've got your direct control with the pull starter there. You really shouldn't, doesn't matter whether it's the Baja or the Losi or the Kraken, you should be able to do the same thing with each of those cars, but use your left hand or your right, depending which way round you are. Use your other hand on the throttle just to try and control the amount of air going in. So hopefully that helps a little bit. If you end up with if you're talking with a brand spanking new engine and a totally dry fuel line, you may find that on your first time of starting, excuse me, on your first time of starting, because your fuel lines are dry, and I would recommend having clear fuel line, that really does help. Having clear fuel line on your intake line, which comes round to this side of the WJ. So you'll have your choke on, obviously you'll be pulling away, hopefully trying to watch your fuel line, and you'll be seeing the fuel coming up the line and into the carburetor, priming it up. Well, the second the fuel sort of enters the carb here, you're only going to have 2 or 3, maybe 5, depending on how long the carb's been sat dry, pulls until you get to the stage of getting your pop. If you're not getting fuel coming up this line into the intake of the WJ, this is when with a new engine that's dry, what I would do is literally block the filter like this with your hand, if you want to remove the filter, and then put your hand fully over the intake, whether it's a velocity stack or whether it's the Losi angled intake, it doesn't matter. So just block the intake so that no air can go in. What then, as you're pulling the engine over, the engine has no choice but to try and put pressure onto the carburetor. Your hand is blocking the intake, the engine then puts lots and lots of suction internally in the carb, which forces the fuel. You'll watch the fuel flying up the line into the carburetor, really quickly priming it. when you are doing that with blocking your hand over the filter, just be careful not to flood the engine, because it's very easy to do that, because of the amount, how much you're blocking the air in there. The engine sucks very, very hard on the carburetor and very quickly primes the engine. So that'll be your way of getting a brand new engine that doesn't want to draw the fuel up with the choke on to fully prime. And then once you're primed, you're back to exactly the same advice that I started the video with. You're getting the pop. Once you've got that pop, and that pop is really important, once you've got that, the choke must come off. And then my recommendation is use your hand on the throttle lever to just give a little bit of throttle to combine with the fuel that you've primed in the engine. Fire up and you should be away. Any questions, let us know, but I feel that should give you a pretty much 95% of the time you're able to, if you follow that method, you really shouldn't have a problem starting your engine, whether it's brand new starting for the first time or whether you're just starting from cold with a used engine that's well tuned. Obviously once you've got your carb tuned in, you're going to have a lot easier time starting because the engine's getting exactly the fuel it wants. While we're doing this video, I will just show you your two different settings here. So here's on your carburetor here, the low needle is the needle that's closest in towards the engine. This is the low needle screw. I always set mine at 1.5 turns out, pretty much leave them there all the time. And this one here is your high needle. There is a little H on the carburetor there. This one, my favorite base setting is 1 3/8. That tends to be a nice base setting for most engines, sort of 40 to 80 cc. With this carburetor, there's a base setting with a fairly rich base setting, and then you can just lean it off from there. This one is with the 2 flats on, just some grips or some pliers on there. You can just gently turn that. That's your idle screw. So if you turn that one in clockwise, it'll wind in against that spring and lift the throttle lever to give it a higher idle. So you don't want any higher idle than what it needs to keep the engine running, to be honest, because then you have a lower running temperature if the idle is nice and low and steady, controlled. Hopefully that was helpful. Let me know. Cheers, guys.